Hello and welcome back to the Purple Cloud podcast. And today's guest is Luan or Cheng Feng, and it's her second time on the podcast, this time discussing Chinese medical and Daoist traditions of musical healing. Luan spent many years in the Five Immortals Temple studying these arts and is luckily teaching them in a course put on by Global Branches, which is something I can highly recommend to anyone out there interested in learning more about how to use music as a healing modality. For more information about these courses, please check out the Global Branches website or the link in the show notes for the podcast. So without further ado, let's get into the interview. All right. So welcome to the Purple Cloud podcast. And I'd like to welcome for the second time, Cheng Feng, who is my sister from the Five Immortals Temple. Welcome back to the podcast.
Thank you, Daniel. Hi, everyone.
And
I'm glad to be back here.
Yeah, happy to have you back. And I guess the reason we decided to do this was I saw through Sarah, who's affiliated with Global Branches, she's running a seminar with you on music healing. And this isn't something I've seen talked about very much in the West, but there is definitely a strong tradition of it in China. And I think you've delved into it quite deeply in your studies and you're going to be doing this seminar about it. So I thought it was a great opportunity to let people know a little bit more about it. So, I mean, to get started, maybe you could introduce a little bit how your first introduction to using music therapy as a healing module.
Yeah, so thank you for inviting me to speak about that topic. I'm actually very excited that Global Branches decided to invite me to give this online class because they really operate as a platform to offer TCM teachings to practitioners. And music healing is such an yet not so well-known topic.
Yeah, most definitely.
The way we work, that it's really exciting to be able to introduce it to a larger public through this platform. I'm very happy about that. Actually, music healing is a very old topic that's been well known throughout the East. So not only in China, but in India as well. I think there's a lot of knowledge and understanding of what music, what sound vibrations can do to the body-mind continuum and how we can affect someone's health through the use of music and through the use of sound. And so on my path, really, most of what I learned directly comes from the Five Immortals Temple in Wudong, China, and from my teacher there, the renowned Abbot Li Shifu, through various lenses, I would say. Like the first one is directly the lens of Chinese medicine itself and the old traditions that we can trace back to the Huang Di Nei Jing, to the Yellow Emperor internal classics, and to the use of tones for healing, which is mostly what we're going to speak about in the course I'm going to give for Global Branches. But I've also been exposed to it a lot through the lens of Daoist practices, Daoist rituals, the study of Daoist classics, and the way they are chanted and sung. And really those two aspects overlap in the tradition.
Yeah, sure. And you mentioned the Huang Di Nei Jing there. And one of the things I really like about the tones in there is a lot of them are in this, we talked a few episodes ago about this Wu Yun Liu Qi chapter, which looks at the movement of the planets and weather and all of this stuff. And it's really a link between these tones and these movements, these great movements of the heavens and stuff. The way the year's divided is often in terms of these five tones and the minor and major tones. And I think that's such an amazing association, and one that's kind of found in in the West as well. So the harmony of the spheres and this kind of thing. So it's really interesting. It's really interesting. It's not just something that's been found in China, but it's quite universal.
Yeah, it's definitely fascinating because if we look at it with a very superficial view, and if we don't really dig into it, it looks like, oh, where does that stuff actually comes from? But the Nei Jing is very clear about it, and it gives us right away all the correspondences between the different dimensions of existence, of manifestation in the cosmos, from the tiniest within our bodies to the largest within the galaxies, you could say. And the tones are really said to resonate with those different planes. And that's truly fascinating, especially when you put them to use in clinic with actual patients and when you see what happens. Because until you do that, it's all sort of theory.
That's something I must confess I don't do an awful lot of. So I'm very interested in hearing what you've done and what you've done with your patients and the results.
Yes, there are many doors to address that. So one thing that can definitely be done is to directly use the 5 healing tones through different methods, which are going to be the content of our course. Yes.
So maybe you could give people a little introduction there. These are the tones.
Yeah, so
maybe
these
you could
are the
talk
5
a little.
healing tones, and they're in correspondences with the 5 phases. And there are different methods to actually use them with qi and with sound from the human voice. So you could use them yourself as a practitioner while giving a treatment on your patient, or you can have your patient use them themselves with different methods or different variations so they can influence their own body-mind system. And that might sound very far out or very immaterial, but sometimes it's very surprising what that does. Like I've seen people, for example, like stuck with intense lumbar pain, lower back pain, and being really unable to move and receive physical treatments such as acupuncture or trina, like directly physical manipulation, and not get any results, and manage to unlock their own back through singing the 5 tones for some amount of time. So sometimes you're not sure what can happen, but it does. Like I remember offering some Daoist medicine retreats myself here in France, and having people come with ailments and offering them to like treat each other with all the methods we learned. Like, okay, let's do moxa, let's do fire healing. And I would expect a lot of result from this more material methods, let's say, and not get much result. And be a bit puzzled, be like, oh, weird, why did that not work? And then we come to the day where we learn the 5 tone healings, and we spend like 2 hours learning it. So everyone is singing and singing and singing. And by the end of the 1 or 2 hours of practice, that person is better. So I'm myself often surprised at what it does to people. I keep being surprised with it.
That's really interesting.
Yes, I would really encourage people to try it out and to explore, because the results do happen.
Is there a particular tone, for example, for back pain? Are you looking at it like from a 5 element organ perspective, and then sort of giving them homework?
But you don't have to narrow it down as much. So yes and no.
Okay.
You could definitely work with only one single tone or with the 5 of them. What we really need to understand here is that when we use the human voice, when we use sound waves, and they might also be produced by instrument as proper music, we're really using something that is exactly in between the material and the immaterial. So something that is really going to impact both the body and the mind, and especially all the chi field of one person and their emotion. And that really has the power to move their structure from within.
Yeah, that's a really great way of looking at it, that between the material and immaterial that's often the way I look at qi, because you have the Jing Qi Shen, and qi being the medium between the immaterial and material, but never thought of music operating in that same in that same field. That's awesome.
Yes, that's why it is so powerful. And that's really how it's been acknowledged by ancient Eastern traditions. And that's how it does impact the chi field so directly. Because it is both wave, frequency, immaterial, and in the same time, it's already the beginning of the manifestation into matter through giving a structure to matter, a fundamental structure from which matter is going to develop. So when we work with the 5 tones, we somehow have a reference of what is an harmonious way for matter to develop according to the 5 phases. And this is what we're calling a bond when we use the 5 tones. We are reharmonizing the chi field of that person.
Yeah, right. And did you have any, I know we'll get into it later with the scriptures, and that's what we talked about last time, but did you have any other kind of musical training when you were at the Five Immortals Temple? Because there was a lot of instruments that were knocking about the temple. And
yeah, definitely. So what I've had the opportunity to most develop was the actual human voice. So my actual voice through a lot of chanting and singing. And that's really the first thing I learned. And that's also considered as the most powerful instrument because the human voice directly resonates within your own body. So it can directly vibrate within. And it also carries your own Shen. So it's a direct power to impact those people Shen, to impact other people's heart. But we also do work with many various instruments. If you look at Daoist rituals, you might see that they may be accompanied by full-blown orchestras, with string instruments, with percussions, with wind instruments, with many, many different instruments. So at the temple, the most basic things we learn are percussions that accompany all the ritual musics. But we also may have a chance to learn some string instrument like the guzheng basics, and some wind instrument like the flute, and all of them also fit into these 5 phases correspondences. So they can really be orchestrated in a way so as to reharmonize the energetic field of one human being. Like if you ever, like this is an opportunity that is hard to come by, but if you ever assist or witness a large Daoist ceremony with an entire orchestra, the power of the music is very balanced between the different categories of instruments. And that definitely creates an energy platform that is going to impact your energy field because it is so much larger than you are.
Yeah, that's really interesting. I'm not sure I've seen I've seen a number of Daoist ceremonies. I don't know I've experienced the full orchestra though.
The larger ones are really harder to come by. You might witness them on festival days in the bigger temples, like in Wudong, in Xiaogong, in the Purple Heaven Palace, or probably in Beijing.
Yeah, I'm sure.
But on the big festival days.
Yeah.
And at the temple, we had the opportunity once to receive a troupe of Daoist priestesses and priests who offered entire ritual there. So they do came with orchestras. There were like 3 high priestesses and priests and entire orchestras. And on that occasion, I had the opportunity to join the orchestra and invite some instruments with them. So I was really lucky to be in the middle of the platform. And that really totally blew my mind.
Yeah, in what way?
Well, because, you know, when you're not very familiar with these rituals and you witness them from the outside, it more so looks like an orchestra playing music and these like guys and women who are the priestesses and priests just like singing their stuff and doing whatever they do during their ritual. But being really in the middle of it, I could really feel how the entire process of the ceremony, with all of the music building up, with all of the singing and chanting, and especially all the invocations, was actually erecting the field little by little by little by little, and then empowering it with specific powers so that it became a very, very high vibrational space for energy transformation. And that's, you can really touch that when you are in it.
And is that something, in a way, you try and recreate when you're with a patient? If you're trying to fix an illness? Okay.
So the principle is the same. The principle is really the same in the sense that you use a sound wave, you use a vibration created within the body mind of the patient by the sound wave to impact the balance of their being. And I'm curious, you're using the tones, but are you also using things like mantra and this kind of thing in the healing space? You see, what's interesting is that in the ancient Chinese tradition, there always was this way of studying through memorizing by heart. And I'm sure you know that. We see that in all the tradition of Chinese medicine, where people, like students in the past, were made to learn by heart all of the classics so that they could recite them. And it's the same in the Daoist tradition. A lot of the classics had to be memorized. And to be memorized, they were often transcribed into chantings or songs. And so, for example, when the lockdown started last year, I started offering a class online on the chanting of the Dao De Jing, which is the main classic of Taoism, right? Which is so well known and translated so many, many times. But really, I wanted to experiment with that because that's one way I've learned to study the scriptures, through actually studying them in Chinese directly. And that's what I've offered in this class. I've invited people, including students of Taoism who spoke no Chinese at all, to join me into looking at the text directly in Chinese, word by word, which is really interesting because once you exercise yourself at doing this quite regularly, somehow the text in Chinese starts speaking to you so much more directly than if you were going through the filter of a translation.
It's really interesting. So you feel there is a difference between the translation and the original, and what about if you don't understand the meaning of the original, but you're still using the Chinese?
Well, there is, of course, I do strongly feel that there is so much benefit at daring to approach the classics directly in Chinese. And with the Dao De Jing, it's something that is not so difficult, because it has a limited numbers of characters that it uses throughout the 81 chapters. It's not so difficult once you get into it and once maybe someone helps you at the beginning, so that the text can start directly talking to you in the way it is structured. Because often translation add things on it or change things to it. And then let me just finish on that. And then the second aspect of this study I offered, and that we did with many people now, is that we learn to chant the text chapter by chapter. So it's really just singing the scripture, singing the text. And this has brought a lot of very interesting effects for people. First, in terms of understanding, because although a lot of them did not actually speak Chinese or understand Chinese, the process of chanting, of singing the scripture, for many of them brought a different connection to the text and a different way of understanding it that bypasses the mind and that makes it more organic. So that's one first thing. And then the second thing is that the chanting itself, singing itself, directly produces effects in your chi field and your body. It puts your mind down, so it allows you to quiet your thoughts in a very direct and efficient way, even if you have no training in meditation. And it also balances the emotions. And of course, it trains your breath. It trains the way you breathe.
Most
it opens
definitely.
Your throat, your chest, and it allows you to ground in your lower abdomen. So very often you find that people, after they've chanted or sang, even if they don't sing well, was great doing this online, because then people are just at home and they can just sing, even if it doesn't sound good. They're not worried that someone else listens to them. But if you, after just half an hour of chanting or singing, everyone can feel that they feel more peaceful, they feel more relaxed, like the entire body has relaxed, their emotions has relaxed, their mind has quieted down, and they directly feel better, just like right there. So that's something we've really observed, and it works every time, I would say.
And is that with that specific text? Obviously, it depends with what you're singing, how you're singing it, and all of that. Like if, you're singing heavy metal, it's a different kind of story, obviously.
Exactly. The melody and the content of what you're singing is going to make a big difference. If you sing a melody that's very aggressive and very fast and very loud, it's going to have the same effect on your emotions and on your chi field. It's going to make you feel very activated and very aggressive. It's going to make your heart pound much faster. It's going to bring stress within your body, actually, basically. So if you do sing a scriptures that is so full of wisdom, and that is also so ancient, that has been sung and sung and sung by so many generations of people, that it's been charged with its own powers, and you directly benefit from that. But yes, it depends on what you think. What doesn't change is the effect it has on you. Once you're really focused on that, it will have an effect. It will impact you, but the content will determine how it impacts you.
Yeah, during lockdown, one of the things, because, you were locked down, I was looking for new things, and I actually did a few months of throat singing, Mongolian throat singing, but yeah, some of that was really amazing. Like I didn't go super in depth with it. I started to get slightly the hang of it towards the end, and it's not something I've really continued that much, but the vibrations were incredible, and you'd feel them in your body. And it really started to open my eyes that I was missing out a few things. And the guy who was teaching me was telling me he never gets sick, and he reckons it clears out his lungs and gets rid of colds and this kind of stuff as well.
Absolutely.
So there's obviously something going on. They're actually talking about it now. I feel a bit guilty and feel I should be exploring it a bit more, but I'm not a good singer. That's the reason I've never really got into it. I have quite a,
I think it doesn't matter. Like really the interesting thing with giving this online class, because I was actually uncomfortable with teaching anything online, just because it's so not the way I've learned.
Sure.
All of the Daoist content. But with the chanting, it was perfect, because people were just at home in front of their computer and nobody was listening to them, so they could sing however they wanted. Whether it was right or wrong, sounded good, didn't sound good, it didn't matter. And it still made them progress into singing better, because the more you practice, the more you progress. And the effects were still there. Because yes, you breathe, your lungs clear up, your throat clears up, you breathe better, but also your mind gets quiet down and your emotions get balanced, and all the vibration move within your body. It is so interesting to read all the feedbacks of people who've gone through that process.
Yeah, right. That's awesome. I'm
also very proud how some of them now, after like a year of this work, are actually able now to approach a chapter of the Dao De Jing and not feel intimidated at looking at it in Chinese, and sometimes can read an entire line and know what it could mean.
Oh, it's a great way to learn. I'm wondering if you find, especially with the tones, that there are any sort of dangers or any sort of, I wouldn't say dangers, but any sort of prohibitions for using them in any certain conditions. Like I'm thinking in, certain people have certain cancers or this or that. Is there any, like I've learned breath work, and there's certain sounds with the breath work. There's, the 6 breathing sounds and the 8 in another system I've learned. And some of them are for excess and you're trying to reduce an excess with these. I think they operate a little differently from the tones, but I'm wondering what your thoughts are. Like they're more focused on maybe an excess or a deficiency. So
you could, let's say, tune them or tailor them.
Okay.
So as to have them focus more on excess and deficiency, but more so generally, they're very universal and very balanced in themselves. So you could also just use them plainly and they would directly just balance a condition. So I've really not seen any condition in which they might be harmful, except maybe in some conditions of mental health imbalances. Such as psychosis, maybe, but already like advanced stages.
Yeah, right.
Where there is like a strong loss of touch with maybe reality and a tendency to lose oneself in vibrations and immaterial worlds and such, in which case I would just really monitor the person very closely in the ways they use them. But generally in treatment for people who present this type of condition, it's of course always best to really have a very strong monitoring around them.
Yeah, great.
But for this kind of like sort of particular mental health conditions, I haven't seen any harmful potentials to them.
And so what's the course itself? How are you going to approach the teaching? I'm quite curious.
So I really want to first speak on the topic of music healing in general within Chinese culture, within the Chinese tradition and the Daoist teaching. So first we're going to take time to define what music was considered as for the ancient Chinese culture and how it was used to actually impact the body-mind of human beings, first as a cultural element and then as a healing tool. And then we're going to go into more details on how it's possible to do that through the human voice, through the use of music, and through the use of different types of music and different types of instruments, so that people who are maybe musicians can have a grid to follow if they want to create their own healing music, for example. And then finally, we're going to go more straight, singly into the topic of the 5 healing tones and where they come from and how they articulate with the 5 phases theory and how we can use them. And in the second part of the course, we're going to learn how to use them. So we're going to learn the methods to use them with qi and to use them with sound. So how to sing them and how to tune them for excess or deficiency, for example, how to apply them with a patient or for oneself, both for prevention and both for treatment. And hopefully, I hope we have enough time to do that. We can do a little bit of case study. So that we get to hear from different questions from the audience and maybe different cases that they would think to apply it for. And we can think together how to tailor it for these specific cases. The goal is really in one class to have practitioners attending it, get the tools in their own hands and be able to apply it for specific circumstances and conditions.
I don't want to jump to the end of your course without doing everything beforehand, but I am quite curious to hear, like, if a patient came in, how you'd approach it in this way. So if a patient came in,
music healing, it can be so very different from person to person. I really generally take time to feel into the person and what they're open to receive or to do as a treatment.
Okay.
Of course, coming from a background of practicing medicine with a very strong Daoist tendency, I would say I always try to get patients involved in their own treatment. Like I want to invite them to observe their lifestyles and their habits and their thoughts and their emotions. And I want to invite them into practicing some methods that are going to be prescriptions, medicine prescriptions. And depending on the degree of openness and receptivity with that, I would use the tones and the music differently. I might use it during a treatment. So for example, giving acupuncture or giving tuina or giving whatever external method, I might, in the same time, use some music healing with or with the 5 tones, maybe with music, maybe with the tones. And then as part of the prescriptions, I might give them some music to listen to every day that will match the need of their condition. Or I might teach them how to use some of the tones or how to sing the tones so that they can also do that every day as part of their prescription.
So what sort of music homework, I'm curious, to listen to would you give? I know it depends on the patient,
Condition.
obviously.
Yeah.
But could you give some examples of a hypothetical condition or one, a patient you might have given it to?
Well, for example, if you get people that you obviously see have like very intense liver qi stagnation.
Okay.
Or liver fire rising, lots of tension and lots of stress and heat coming up maybe, then you would want to appease their liver. And for this, you would want to use the musical instruments that are in correspondences with the liver phase, which are wind instruments, wooden instruments, maybe bamboo flutes. So if they're musicians themselves, you would invite them to play that or to listen to this type of music. And then you might suggest to them various artists or music types that would help them bring peace to their liver, for example. And then as part of your prescription, you would tell them, okay, every day you need to listen to this music or that type of music for an hour, 2 hours, 3 hours before sleep, when you wake up. Generally, I try to tailor it also to the lifestyle of people and to the severity of their condition. Because if, of course, you get someone who has a very advanced condition, who is in a quite severe state, then you need to be very consistent. It's not going to work to listen for music for 15 minutes. That's what I mean. You need to be very consistent and take more time every day to do that. But if you get people with, let's say, a middle or mild condition with a very active lifestyle, you also need to offer them something that they can actually do.
And I'm wondering if you've ever come across the opposite, like a musician whose instrument is damaged them over the years, or someone
absolutely.
who listens to certain music and then that has
happens
had a
all
health
the time.
effect.
And once we understand a bit more about the theory of music healing, we witness that all the time, especially in nowadays society. That a lot of people are exposed to a lot of music that is first very loud and very messy, that is very fast, very unharmonious, and that actually little by little but very constantly messes their energetic field up. And they don't necessarily recognize the source of that disharmony, but it does impact them. Even just the sound environment we may live in. Like if we live in environments where there's a lot of noise pollution, does impact our health. Or if we work, for example, in a supermarket where there's loud pop music playing all day long with a lot of advertising, that's a lot of noise pollution. And that for sure impacts one's nervous system. So we actually witness that all the time, and we ourselves have been exposed to that all the time.
I find as I get older, I notice it more, but I can't stand noise pollution, loud places, especially where I live. Like I can't. Because before I could have been living on a busy road. I remember in my 20s, I'm sure it had an impact, but I wouldn't notice it, in the same way.
Yeah, exactly.
I really notice it.
When we're younger, our Jing Qi Shen is like really flourishing. So we don't really feel yet the impact of disharmonies. And sometimes we like to actually play with it. We like to play with messing ourselves up, right?
Yeah, well,
that's what young people do a lot. But as soon as you get a little bit older, you really get sensitive to it.
Well, I used to DJ and go to raves. I don't know what that all did to me, but definitely, messed me around a bit, that and other things. But yeah.
Well, the experience of contrast is part of the experience. That's how we
Most
learn
definitely.
too.
Yeah,
Yeah.
for sure. And so we've talked a little bit about the tones, but I'm curious how like you said, the voice is the big thing, the big path you've gone down. And
Yeah.
I'm wondering how we talked a little bit about the scriptures before, but how that gets into it, and any similarities or differences you've noticed in your approach to these sort of fields.
Well, similarities, of course, like all the principles of it. If you study a little bit of the music of the scriptures, of course, as the main part is for the human voice, because the human voice is directly connected to spirit, to your own spirit, and to spirit at large. But if you also study a bit more of the musical accompaniment of the scripture, all of it has been created according to this principle, so as to create harmony between the five phases and between the different types of instruments. So all the foundational principles for music healings are already embedded within the way the music of the scriptures was created. So once you learn to play it, to sing it, to generate that space, you really become very familiar with what it does. And what there is, let's say, more than that is really the fact that these are the scriptures for the ritual. So they're directly invocations. They have a very, very specific content. And this content is it's a little bit as if you've got a smartphone, let's say, and you want to call someone. You are going to need different things. You're going to need the smartphone itself, which is your physical device. So you're going to need your human voice, and you're going to need musical instruments. And of course, you're going to need to know how to use them. But then you need more than that. You need to have signal. So you need to have the potential, the ability to create that connection. And you need the phone number. Right? Otherwise, you're not going to reach the person you're trying to call. And within the scriptures, you've got all of that. You've got the signals, the connections that's directly transmitted by the lineage of teachers. When you learn the ritual, you've got the phone number, and that is the content of the scripture itself. The content of the way an invocation is displayed is going to be the phone number. So you actually reach someone directly. And then you've got the smartphone itself, which is all the musical accompaniment and your human voice and the way it's been written according to 5 movements, 5 phases theory. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it does. I actually really like that analogy. I'm pondering
That's
it a little bit.
exactly what it does.
Yeah.
It's very efficient. Otherwise, you might end up having only the smartphone, and you're like a kid, talking into your smartphone, but you don't have the number, and you don't have the signal, and you're thinking you're talking to someone, but who's actually, what's actually going on, you're not really sure. Or sometimes you've got the number, but you've got no smartphone. Yeah. Anyways, it's just a funny analogy to explain what's going on inside.
I'm just picturing my niece with the play phones having conversations on those, that kind of thing. But yeah, it's a really good analogy. Just I'm wondering if something similar applies with the scriptures, in that if somebody doesn't know what they're saying, but they still chant the scriptures, what that effect is, or if someone was translating a translation of the scriptures, what that kind of effect is, if that's a similar kind of vibe to what you were discussing before.
That's a very good question, and that's the questions but not only I think we as a community of Daoist practitioners are all of international Daoist practitioners are all exploring together. And I've definitely witnessed people obtaining connection and obtaining communication without knowing what they were chanting exactly, word by word. So without a direct understanding of the text. So that has definitely happened. And I also see people with a very strong need to understand with their mind what they're saying. So they work more on the translation. Sometimes they even chant the translation. So that gets also embedded within their consciousness. And to some extent, it does help them become more familiar with the scriptures itself. But I don't think that the original Chinese Zhou incantations and scriptures can be replaced because they're really charged with their own power by now, after so many generations have used them. But it's still a topic of exploration.
Yeah, and there are more and more people in the West interested in this, so I'm sure they have their own experiences with it. It's very interesting.
Yeah, it's interesting. It would be very interesting to talk more about this and to experiment more and to see what happens.
And you've done a lot of travel outside of China, and I'm wondering if you've had any encounters with this music healing or music theory outside of China, and if that sort of illuminated you.
There is a very powerful tradition of music healing in India that is very ancient for sure. Like the classical Indian music has so much to offer and so much knowledge about music and sound waves and vibrations and how they affect the human body, mind, and the human spirit. This is just an entire field in itself. But the ancient yogic traditions have always acknowledged that sound was the first manifestation of creation, that all of creation starts as sound first, just exactly because of that, because sound is between the material and the immaterial. And from this understanding, there has been so much exploration of what sound does, and all of their music was initially built from this understanding. It's absolutely fascinating if you research it a little bit. Even the ancient Indian instruments, like there is one very ancient sitar, Indian sitar, which is a string instrument. It's called a rudravina, and it's made with two huge gourds that are emptied out on both sides, and with like a very long body on which strings are attached. And the body used to be made at the exact length of the spine of the player, so that it would actually match the actual physical vehicle.
That's amazing.
Yes, this instrument is absolutely fascinating. And each frequency on the instrument, depending on its height and also on the microtone it would produce, would resonate with all the energy system of that person. I've even heard legends that in ancient times there were music competitions for the musicians of these specific instruments, and that the winner was declared as the winner once he was able to light a candle with his music.
Yeah, right.
So that's an ancient story, but still that's how the ancient classical music tradition in India was developed from this point of view and with this research. It's absolutely fascinating.
Yeah, no, it's amazing. It makes me think even in the Chinese culture, I remember there was this silly movie, but it's what came to mind, Kung Fu Hustle. Did you ever see this movie?
Yeah, it's hilarious. Yeah.
But there's a scene where they're having the fight and he's got the guzheng and he's firing all this. Yeah, anyway. So these ideas have been in the culture and various cultures for a long time. For a long time. Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
And for sure they were much more developed sometimes before. We've lost a lot of it. The reality, I believe, is that we've lost a lot of it.
Do you think a lot of it's because we have so much noise around?
Yes,
definitely. We become desensitized in a way. Perhaps they have, because they get drowned out a little bit, these other forms of music, they get. Do you think that in our society, because we have so much more stimulus going on?
Yes, that's for sure one part of it. that we're so stimulated and there is so much noise pollution all the time. But I think it's also really a direction of the human research on existence, that now the more like Western globalized culture is so much more turned toward the outside and toward producing things outside to enhance human existence versus a more inward research of the meaning
most
of
definitely
human existence.
Yeah. And I mean, I can carry around in my pocket now millions of hours of music I carry around, and I can listen at any time. Whereas that's a very new thing. You know, I can put things in my ear. That's a very, very new thing.
And you can have it change all the time. So, and also the way it is actually recorded, I believe, makes it lose some vibrations.
Yeah.
And some very like subtle frequencies that we don't realize we lose, we don't hear or we don't receive, but that definitely lost. Just because of the way it's recorded on the device.
For sure.
And it's just the way we also explore things now. Do we actually take the time to listen to something in a way that we try to feel what it really does within our body and how it really vibrates within our body?
I mean, I even notice a difference to the way I listen to music now than I did 20, 30 years ago, because I think there's so much more of it. It doesn't feel as special in a way because you can flick through, and I don't, whereas before you'd get an album and you'd listen to every song and every moment of it. And I don't really do that anymore. I'm sad to say.
And every instrument and how they mix and how they vibrate in your body and how they make you feel, and does that impact your emotions? Yeah.
Oh well, but
so that's why we need more silence.
More silence.
And that's why silence is such a huge part of music healing, actually.
Oh, really?
It's the number one part of music healing is that we need silence. We need moments of silence, moments of stillness, moments to be quiet, to quiet the mind and to quiet the emotions and to have a chance to, have time and space in silence.
I find that's...
And that could maybe also be a part of music healing prescriptions.
I think for a lot of people, that's actually quite a daunting notion, I think, in our society, because that busyness, often they're afraid of what happens when that disappears and what might come up when people are more silent and more still.
Yes.
So, I think it could be very powerful.
Yes, and when there's no more distraction and no more like going through your smartphone or just no more distraction, but having empty space for things to fall back where they need to.
Yeah. On that note, maybe we should be silent and wrap up the podcast. I think it's getting to that time, but it's it's been wonderful to speak with you, and I highly recommend anyone out there to take your course and learn more about this wonderful world of music therapy in the Chinese tradition.
Thank you. Everyone is welcome, really. There is no necessary background, even if you are not Chinese medicine practitioners, or if you're not so familiar with these principles, you'll still be able to get a lot out of it, and you will still be able to use the methods. Everyone can learn it, really. So it can be used both by practitioners for their clinic and with their patients in prevention and in treatment, but it also can be used by anybody for themselves or for their friends and families.
Yeah, that's great. Very flexible, and everyone's got a voice, so everyone can do something.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Great. All right. Well, thanks again.
Thank you, Daniel. Thank you. That was quite, very nice conversation.
Yeah, I enjoyed it too. All right. I'll see you later.
Bye, everyone. Thank you for listening.
And I'd once again like to thank Cheng Feng for joining us on the podcast and sharing her knowledge of musical healing. And just a reminder, she will be teaching a course on the subject through Global Branches. Anyone interested, I'd highly recommend you join her there. All the best, and I'll see you next time.